Back to the deep dive, where we explore the sources you're curious about and pull out the insights that matter. We're here to help you get informed quickly.
And today we're diving into a really powerful spiritual reflection. It's an analysis that's centered on a few key verses from the Old Testament prophet Zechariah, chapter 10, but also brings in some big ideas about grace from 1 Corinthians.
The sources, they set this emotional scene right at the start, and it's a brilliant way to frame the whole conversation, really. They talk about that rare, almost startling feeling of seeing the sun after weeks of nonstop rain.
Right, like in Vancouver.
Exactly, Vancouver. Raincouver, they call it.
Yeah.
And that feeling of finding something so precious and totally unexpected that really captures the spirit of the insights we're looking at today.
It's a perfect starting point. So our mission today is to unpack the theological view that the author is presenting here, especially around this idea of a divine calling, how grace works, and just how big the scope of redemption is.
And the whole thing is anchored by this one central image, this one powerful metaphor that the author uses to explain that calling. They call it the whistle of compassion. We're going to be looking at how this specific viewpoint sees the gathering of people as being based entirely on a single divine quality, his deep compassion or mercy.
So that image of the whistle, it comes straight out of Zechariah 10, verse 8.
Let's unpack that. When the author reads that verse, they paint this really vivid picture. What are we seeing in this scene?
Well, the visual is immediate. It's pastoral. You see a good shepherd, but instead of, shouting or using force, he just whistles to call his sheep.
A whistle.
A whistle. The specific text they focus on is, I will signal for them and gather them in. Surely I have redeemed them. They will be as numerous as before.
I find the choice of signal really interesting. Why a whistle? Not a huge trumpet blast or some grand display.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? The source is suggesting that the initial divine call is subtle. It's personal. It could even be easily missed, like that rare bit of sunshine in Vancouver.
That's a great point. And what's fascinating is how the source connects that quiet, simple sound directly to this massive result. Complete restoration.
Yeah, it's not just a small improvement. The promise is that they will be as numerous as before. That suggests a total reversal of everything they've lost, all triggered by one simple, recognizable sound.
It really makes you think about how we often expect these huge, loud interventions, but maybe grace shows up as this quiet frequency, a whistle that the scattered sheep just somehow instinctively know.
Exactly. The signal itself kicks off the redemption, and the sound seems to guarantee the restoration. It's like the simplicity of the action is completely disproportionate to the complexity of the result.
A quiet signal, a massive restoration. Okay, so that raises the next big question, which is who? Who exactly is hearing this whistle? Because the text gets really specific in Zechariah 10, verse 6.
It does. The focus shifts from the how to the who. And the source spends a lot of time on the promise in that verse. I will strengthen the house of Judah and save the house of Joseph.
And to really get the full impact, we have to understand how the author interprets those two names. They're not just old tribes.
No, not at all. Their interpretation is crucial to understanding the universal scope of the promise.
So how do they break down Judah and Joseph?
Okay, so first, the house of Judah. The author interprets this as the Jews, the original covenant people, those connected to the throne of David. That's the more expected group.
The internal group.
The internal group, yes. But then we get to the house of Joseph, and this is where the scope just explodes beyond all expectation.
This is where it gets really profound, I think. The metaphor the source uses for Joseph, it's just beautiful.
It is. They interpret the house of Joseph as representing the Gentiles. So all the other nations outside of that original covenant. And the metaphor they use is branches extending over the wall.
Branches over the wall. I love that.
It's critical because it takes this promise from being a sort of a localized family reunion for one people group and turns it into a universal global calling that crosses every single border you can imagine.
So what the source is arguing is that this salvation promise is about God calling all of his sheep from all the nations, Jew and Gentile alike, and bringing them all back home. Doesn't matter where they were scattered or what wall was between them.
Precisely. It connects this ancient historical promise in Zechariah to a completely universal idea of grace. The argument is that the shepherd's whistle was always meant to be heard across all nations. It's a profoundly hopeful interpretation.
Okay, so if the whistle is the action and the gathering of Judah and Joseph is the result, what's the power source? What's the engine driving this whole process? Especially, as the author says, if the sheep were scattered and rolling in sin.
The source points, immediately and emphatically to one phrase in verse 6, because I have compassion on them. That's it. That's the engine. God's compassion, the go.
So it's not just a nice feeling God has. It's the active driving force.
It's the active force. The source makes it very clear that this whole miraculous return isn't driven by the sheik's worthiness or their ability to find their own way back. It's driven entirely by the shepherd's feeling for them.
And a vital distinction.
Absolutely. The author calls the return of those rolling in sin a miraculous event powered entirely by the Lord's pity. It's, by its very definition, completely unearned. And this is where they make their most radical claim.
Which is that because God took pity, salvation was received without cost. That's a huge statement. It implies no prerequisite, no work, no merit, no qualification.
Yes, and they push it even further. They start to question the very nature of our own spiritual effort. The source concludes, and this is a direct quote, that even my faith is not my own. It is entirely a gift of God's compassion.
Wow. So it takes personal effort completely out of the equation for that initial moment of redemption.
It does. It places everything 100% on divine favor.
But hold on. I mean, if the whole process, even our ability to have faith and hear the whistle, is a gift, doesn't that sort of sideline human will entirely? How does the author square that without cost idea with, the need for any kind of ongoing spiritual life or action?
And that's the tension, right? That's the tension the source acknowledges, and it leads them directly to the next part of their argument. The key is that action is a response to grace, not a condition for it.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why they bring in the Apostle Paul, specifically his words in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 10.
Which is where Paul basically says all his hard work came after he received grace, not before.
Exactly. Paul says, "But whatever I am now, it is all because God poured out his special favor on me. Yet it was not I, but God who was working through me by his grace." It's the same idea. The work gets done, but the source of the power for that work is divine compassion. It's a shift from working for grace to working from grace.
That distinction is a perfect bridge, actually. It takes us from this grand universal prophecy to something intensely personal. We shift now to the author's own story, their own testimony of hearing that whistle.
Right. The author shares a few specific moments of receiving this grace, which really helps to make these big theological ideas relatable. It grounds it in a real person's experience.
And the first one they mention is this moment of just pure awe. They call it the miracle of recognizing the whistling sound on a university campus about 30 years ago.
And they frame it as something almost impossible. This unexpected moment of sunshine just breaking through all the noise of everyday life. And it led to this huge life-changing conversion.
They seem genuinely amazed by it, even now. The author talks about their confusion and wonder at how they, of all people, came to recognize a poor carpenter's son from ancient Nazareth as my Lord.
And they confess that this recognition could only be because of compassion and grace. A subtle call that somehow just cut through centuries of time and thousands of miles of geography.
Then there's the second calling they mention, which is just as telling. It's about how divine direction can completely override our own personal plans.
Yeah, the author confesses that being called to Canada was something never in my life plans. It was just not on the map. But it happened purely by grace because they were following another calling that completely rerouted their life.
So in both cases, the message is the same. Major life changes, spiritual or physical, aren't the product of our own careful planning. They're a result of the shepherd's continuing guiding whistle.
They're essentially saying, the whistle found me when I wasn't even looking for it, and it has guided me to places I never, ever planned to go.
And this whole journey of recognizing the whistle and following it, it all culminates in what I think is the most unique and powerful analogy in the whole source. It's something they use in their concluding prayer. The priming water.
The chane, yes. It's a brilliant metaphor because it finally resolves that tension we were talking about earlier between this radical grace and our human response to it.
Explain it for us. What is priming water?
So imagine an old-fashioned hand pump, the kind you'd see on a farm to get water from a well. To get it to work, you often have to pour a small amount of water into the top first.
Right, to create the seal, to get the suction going.
Precisely. That little bit of water you pour in is the priming water. And it's that small act that enables the pump to then draw up the much, much larger volume of water from deep down in the well.
Okay, I see where this is going. So the author commits to pouring out a bucket of priming water every day in their prayer. This is their small, quiet, daily act of obedience.
Exactly. It's their response to the grace they've already received. And notice the key difference here. They aren't creating the well water.
No.
They're not digging the well. They're just doing the small, necessary thing that allows the massive, unstoppable flow of water, which is already there, to finally come out.
That makes so much sense. The priming water isn't merit, it's enablement. It's the small key that unlocks the massive resource. So what's the expected result of this small daily act?
The result they expect is, what's staggering? They believe that this daily commitment, this little bucket of priming water, will become a small start that grows into a ditch, then a stream, and eventually a mighty river that cannot be crossed,
Wow.
until God's will for all the nations is finally accomplished.
That's such a powerful visual contrast. You start with this one tiny, seemingly insignificant act of faith each day, and that quiet commitment initiates this huge, unstoppable current that achieves a universal purpose.
The micro fuels the macro, but only because the macro, the well of God's grace, is already there and is already infinite. It completely shifts the focus from trying to achieve the mighty river yourself to simply doing the small thing that allows that divine power to flow through you.
So if we pull this all together for you, the listener, this reflection is arguing that the shepherd uses a subtle, quiet signal, a whistle, to gather people from all over the world. And that moment of hearing it is like finding that rare, unexpected sunshine.
And this gathering is powered entirely by unearned compassion, this which leads to a state of complete restoration. The source even argues that our ability to hear the whistle and have faith is itself a gift, not our own achievement.
But the journey doesn't stop with just receiving the gift. The flow has to continue. So what's the call to action here?
Well, after embracing this fullness of grace and joy, the author resolves to abundantly flow out the love I have received, so that other sheep outside the pen may also fully enjoy the same love I have enjoyed. The one who receives compassion becomes a channel for it.
Which brings us right back to that powerful practical image of the priming water. If receiving grace is the initial miracle, then the continued work of grace in the world is fueled by these small, sustained efforts.
And that really leaves us with a final thought to ponder, doesn't it? If the resource of grace is infinite and guaranteed by compassion, how does the smallest, seemingly insignificant act of obedience, that priming water we pour out, start the flow toward a mighty, uncrossable river?
That's the challenge for all of us, I think. What is that small, intentional act of obedience you might pour out today? Trusting that it could initiate a much larger current of grace and compassion in the world around you. Something to think about.